The metal cage was cold and Captain Taemin could feel the alien ship moving through space around him. His Navy SEAL uniform was torn in 3 places and blood had dried on his left arm from the fight on Mars Colony 7 just 6 hours ago. The purple-skinned aliens with their 4 arms were watching him through the energy bars that glowed with a soft blue light. Commander Veltar stood outside the cage studying this human prisoner with his large yellow eyes that had no pupils. The Corvani warrior was 8 feet tall and his skin looked like thick leather. His 4 arms each ended in hands that had 6 fingers with claws that could cut through steel. His voice was deep and sounded like rocks grinding together when he spoke to his soldiers. These Corvani had conquered 12 different star systems in the past 5 years, and they thought humans were just another weak species that would fall easily to their advanced weapons and superior strength. They had attacked Mars Colony 7 without warning, using ships that could destroy entire cities with one shot. Their ground troops had expected the human defenders to run away in fear like so many other species had done before, but Taemin had not run away. He had stayed behind. When the evacuation ships left to make sure all the colony children got to safety, he had held his position at the main gate for 4 hours. Against impossible odds, using only his rifle and the explosives he carried, the aliens had been surprised. When this small human soldier had destroyed 2 of their assault vehicles and killed 15 of their warriors before they finally captured him, what the Corvani did not know was that Taemin had spent 15 years training with Earth's most dangerous military units. He had completed missions in places where other soldiers could not survive. He had learned to fight in deserts where the temperature reached 140 degrees and in Arctic conditions where exposed skin would freeze in seconds. He had been trained to survive underwater for impossible lengths of time and to climb mountains that most people thought were too dangerous to attempt. His mind was already working even though his body was trapped in the alien cage. He was watching the guard patterns and memorizing how many steps it took each alien to walk from one end of the corridor to the other. He counted the seconds between when the energy bars powered down for cleaning and when they came back up. He noticed that the ship had a rhythm to its sounds and vibrations that told him when the engines were working hardest and when they were running on minimum power. The other human prisoners in nearby cages were whispering to each other about how hopeless their situation was. There were 23 other humans captured from the colony, including Dr. Min Seo, who had been working in the medical center, and engineer So Young, who had been trying to repair the colony defense systems. When the attack began, they all looked at Taemin with a mixture of hope and fear because they had heard stories about what Navy SEALs could do. Young alien guard Zekros brought food to the prisoners twice each day, and Taemin watched him carefully. The guard was smaller than the other Corvani soldiers and seemed nervous around the human prisoners. His energy weapon took exactly 4 seconds to charge up from standby mode, and he always approached the cages from the left side because there was a slight blind spot in the corridor. Security sensors on that Taemin also noticed that the main power conduits for this section of the ship ran directly above the prisoner holding area. The aliens had built their ship for maximum efficiency, but they had not considered that a prisoner might know how to exploit their engineering choices. The power conduits were protected by standard shielding, but Taemin could see stress points where the metal joined together. During the second day of his captivity, Zekros made a mistake that would cost the Corvani dearly. The young guard got too close to Taemin cage while delivering food, and the human was able to observe exactly how the energy lock system worked. The lock required a specific sequence of touches on a control panel, and each touch created a small sound that was different from the others. That night, when the ship lighting dimmed for the sleep cycle, Taemin began working on his escape plan. He had identified 17 different ways to break free from the cage, and each method would lead to different advantages once he was loose in the ship. The aliens thought their technology was too advanced for a primitive human to understand, but they were wrong about that. His instructors back on Earth had taught him that every prison was designed by people who made assumptions about their prisoners. The Corvani assumed that humans were weak and stupid compared to their advanced civilization. They assumed that their technology was beyond human understanding. They assumed that a single prisoner could never threaten a warship carrying 2,000 alien soldiers. Taemin smiled in the darkness of his cage as he remembered what his survival instructor had told his SEL class during their final exercise. The instructor had said that a single skilled warrior who understood his enemy weaknesses could change the outcome of any battle. No matter how impossible the odds seemed, the key was patience and observation and the willingness to use every advantage. No matter how small the ship around him hummed with the power of engines that could push it faster than light across the galaxy, the aliens had weapons that could destroy planets and shields that could stop almost any attack. Their soldiers were bigger and stronger than humans, and they had been conquering other species for hundreds of years, but they had never faced someone who had been trained to turn disadvantages into weapons. As the alien ship continued its journey toward the Corvani homeworld, Taemin worked slowly and quietly on loosening one of the support beams in his cage. The metal was strong, but it had been designed to hold prisoners who would simply wait for their fate. The aliens had not planned for someone who understood that every structure had weak points that could be exploited with patience and the right kind of pressure. Tomorrow, when Zekros brought breakfast, Taemin would be ready to begin showing the galaxy what a human soldier could really accomplish. When he stopped fighting by alien rules and started fighting to win. Other prisoners slept fitfully in their cages, but Taemin remained awake, planning each step of what would become the most impossible military victory in galactic history. The Corvani thought they had captured just another primitive human warrior, but they were about to learn that they had made the biggest mistake of their conquest. The morning alarm sounded through the ship like the roar of an angry beast, and Taemin was ready. Zekros walked down the corridor carrying the food containers, just as he had done every day since the humans were captured. The young Corvani guard was thinking about his home planet and the promotion he would get for helping capture these primitive creatures. He was not thinking about the loose support beam that Taemin had been working on all night. When Zekros approached the cage, Taemin was lying on the floor pretending to be sick. The guard set down his energy weapon and reached for his medical scanner because Commander Veltar had ordered him to keep the prisoners alive for questioning. This was exactly what Taemin had been waiting for. The moment the weapon left the alien hand, Taemin struck the support beam, came free with a sharp crack, and Taemin used it like a spear through the energy bars. The pointed end caught Zekros in the throat at exactly the right pressure point that Taemin had learned during hand-to-hand combat training in Thailand. The alien guard dropped to the floor, unconscious but still breathing. Taemin had not killed him because dead guards were discovered faster than sleeping ones working. Quickly, Taemin used the fallen guard access card to deactivate his cage lock. The energy bars flickered and went dark, and he stepped out into the corridor for the first time in 3 days. His muscles were stiff from being cramped in the small space, but his training had taught him how to stay ready. Even when confined, he moved to the other cages and began freeing the other human prisoners. Dr. Minesio was the first to be released, and she immediately began checking on the other prisoners. Engineer So-young was next, and she started examining the alien technology around them with professional interest. Pilot Han-woo flexed his hands and asked where they could find weapons. The other prisoners gathered around Taemin, looking for leadership and hoping for a plan that would get them home. Taemin explained his observations about the ship layout and guard patterns. He told them about the power conduits above them and the maintenance shafts that connected different sections of the ship. Dr. Menesio pointed out that the aliens had different biology and their sensors might not detect human heat signatures as accurately. Engineer So-young noted that the power systems use similar principles to Earth technology, but with much more energy. The group moved carefully through the ship using the maintenance passages that Taemin had identified during his captivity. The aliens had built their ship for efficiency and intimidation, but they had not considered that their enemies might use the service corridors and ventilation systems. The Corvani were too proud to think that anyone would crawl through dirty spaces like maintenance tunnels. Taemin led them through a maze of pipes and cables that ran between the ship main decks. His SEAL training had included urban warfare scenarios where soldiers had to move through buildings without being detected. The techniques were the same even on an alien warship: stay low, move slowly, and avoid creating any sounds or vibrations that would alert the enemy. They reached the ship armory after 2 hours of careful movement. The door was protected by a complex lock system, but engineer So Young had been watching how the aliens operated their technology she managed to bypass the security by rerouting power from a nearby maintenance panel. The armory door slid open, revealing weapons that looked like something from a science fiction movie. The energy weapons were lighter than human firearms, but much more powerful. Each weapon had settings that could stun, paralyze, or kill depending on how they were adjusted. Taemin showed the others how to hold and aim the alien weapons, while Dr. Min Seo figured out how the power cells worked. Pilot Hyung-woo found what looked like grenades but were actually small devices that could disrupt electronic systems, while the others armed themselves. Taemin was studying the ship technical manuals that were stored in the armory computer system. The aliens had been careless about security because they never expected prisoners to reach this area. The manuals showed him exactly what he needed to know about the ship critical systems and their weak points. The power core was located in the center of the ship, and it supplied energy to everything, including the engine's weapons and life support. The core was protected by multiple layers of shielding and security systems, but Taemin could see a way to reach it through the maintenance tunnels the aliens had never considered. That someone might try to sabotage their own ship from the inside. He began planning a series of carefully timed explosions that would disable the ship without destroying it completely. They needed the ship to remain functional long enough for his real plan to work. The other Corvani vessels in the fleet were still out there, and Taemin intended to use this captured ship against them. Dr. Min Seo found medical supplies that could help treat their injuries and boost their energy levels. Engineer So Young discovered that the ship manufacturing systems could be used to create new devices if someone understood the programming language. Pilot Hyun-woo located the navigation systems and began studying the fleet movement patterns as they prepared to move deeper into the ship. Taemin explained the next phase of his plan. They would split into two groups. One group would create diversions to draw the alien crew away from critical areas. The other group would plant explosive charges at key points throughout the ship. The timing had to be perfect or they would all be killed. Other humans looked at him with a mixture of amazement and terror. They were beginning to understand that this Navy SEAL was not just planning to escape. He was planning to capture an entire alien warship and use it as a weapon against the fleet that had destroyed their colony. His confidence was infectious, and they began to believe that the impossible might actually be possible. Commander Veltar was reviewing battle reports in his quarters when the first alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Emergency lights flashed red and automated voices announced that there had been multiple power failures on 3 different decks. The commander rushed to the bridge expecting to find his crew dealing with a technical malfunction. Instead, he found chaos. Humans were moving through his ship like ghosts, striking at critical systems and disappearing before his soldiers could respond. The primitive prisoners had somehow escaped and armed themselves with Corvani weapons. They were fighting with a coordination and skill that no other species had ever shown against his forces. The real shock came when Veltar realized that the humans were not just trying to escape, they were systematically taking control of his ship. The bridge of the Corvani warship erupted into complete chaos as Taemin burst through the main entrance doors, carrying 2 alien energy weapons. The purple-skinned aliens had been so focused on the emergency alarms coming from the lower decks that they never expected the human prisoners to reach the command center. Commander Veltar 4 arms reached for his ceremonial plasma blade, but human reflexes trained through years of combat proved much faster than alien Predetermin had trained for scenarios exactly like this. During his time with the Navy SEALs, he had fought in situations where he was outnumbered 50-1 and survived by using speed, surprise, and the environment as weapons. The alien bridge was just another hostile territory to conquer, and every piece of equipment around him was a potential tool for victory. The Corvani bridge officers were used to commanding battles from safe distances behind layers of shields and defensive systems. They had never faced close quarters combat against someone who had been trained in 17 different fighting styles from around Earth. Their energy weapons were powerful, but they were designed for long-range battles, not for fighting in the cramped confines of a starship. Brigitte Min moved like flowing water around the bridge, using every obstacle to his advantage. Computer consoles became improvised shields when the aliens tried to shoot him. Control panels became weapons when he ripped them from their mountings. And threw them with deadly accuracy. The artificial gravity system that the aliens took for granted became his ally as he used momentum and physics in ways they had never imagined. Each movement was calculated and efficient. There was no wasted motion or unnecessary violence. This was not just fighting, this was warfare elevated to the level of art form. Every strike served multiple purposes, disabling an enemy, destroying equipment, and positioning him for the next attack. His instructors would have been proud to see their training put to such perfect use. The ship communication systems were crackling with demands for updates from other vessels in the Corvani fleet. Admiral Torvak's voice came through the speakers asking for status reports and threatening severe punishment if Commander Veltar did not respond immediately. Taemin smiled grimly as he reached the main communication console and began accessing the command codes he had memorized while watching the crew operate their systems. His years of studying enemy communication patterns during Earth conflicts had prepared him for exactly this moment. Every military organization, whether human or alien, had similar weaknesses in their communication protocols. They relied on rigid hierarchy and established procedures that could be exploited by someone who understood how to manipulate the system. With a few quick keystrokes, Taemin began transmitting false orders throughout the entire Corvani fleet. The aliens' own military discipline became a weapon in his hands as ship after ship acknowledged his commands and began moving into positions that would serve his purposes. The fleet was spreading out into what they thought was a defensive formation but was actually a trap. Commander Veltar managed to draw his plasma blade despite his injuries and charged at the human with a roar of rage that echoed through the bridge. The alien was 8 feet tall with 4 arms and had been trained as a warrior since childhood. His blade could cut through steel and his strength was 3 times that of any human, but Taemin had not survived 15 years of impossible missions by relying on strength alone. The human dropped low under the alien swing and used a combat knife he had taken from the armory to strike at pressure points behind Veltar's knees. The Corvani biology was different from human, but the principles of leverage and joint manipulation were universal. The massive alien warrior crashed to the deck as his legs gave out from under him as explosions continued to rock the ship from the charges that the other humans had planted throughout the critical systems. Taemin fought his way to the navigation controls. The bridge was filled with smoke and the emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie red glow. Sparks flew from damaged consoles and the artificial gravity fluctuated, making movement unpredictable. The other Corvani vessels in the fleet were moving into formation exactly as Taemin had ordered them to do. Through the false communications, they thought they were responding to a major external threat and had no idea that the real danger was already inside their command structure, the rigid military training that made them such effective conquerors was now being used to orchestrate their own destruction. Taemin accessed the ship weapons systems and began targeting the fleet vessels that were now perfectly positioned for what he had planned. The aliens had created weapons of incredible power that could destroy entire cities, but they had never considered that those same weapons could be turned against their own forces. The irony was not lost on him as he prepared to use their own technology to defeat them. Engineer So Young's voice crackled through the communication system, reporting that the power core modifications were complete. D'Armenesio confirmed that the medical bay had been secured and the other human prisoners were safe. Pilot Hien Wu announced that he had gained control of the navigation systems and was ready to execute whatever plan Taemin had in mind. The first phase of the plan was now complete, but the real destruction was about to begin. Taemin looked out through the bridge main viewing screen at the Corvani fleet spread out across space like targets in a shooting gallery. Each ship represented thousands of alien warriors and enough firepower to conquer entire star systems. But they had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated what a human could accomplish when fighting for survival. Commander Veltar struggled to speak through his pain and injuries, asking the question that every Corvani in the fleet would soon be wondering: how could one primitive human defeat the most powerful military force in the galaxy? The answer was simple: humans did not fight fair, they fought to win, and they never gave up no matter how impossible the odds seemed. As Taman began the next phase of his plan, the explosions from the lower decks reached a crescendo and the great warship shuddered under the controlled destruction. The other vessels in the fleet were about to learn that their greatest enemy was not another military force but the determination of a single human who refused to accept defeat. From the captured command ship bridge, Tamin watched the Corvani fleet move through space. Like pieces on a deadly chessboard, the 50 remaining alien warships were following his false orders with perfect military precision, completely unaware that their own communication systems had been compromised. Years of studying tactical warfare at the Naval War College had taught him that the greatest victories came from making enemies defeat themselves. The aliens' advanced technology and rigid military discipline had been their greatest strengths during the conquest of 12-star systems. But now those same qualities were becoming their fatal weakness. Tamin transmitted carefully coordinated movement orders that would place each ship in exactly the position he needed for the next phase of his plan. Using the ship advanced manufacturing systems, Tamin created devices that would have impressed his old demolitions instructors back on Earth. The Corvani had energy manipulation technology and molecular fabrication systems that human science could only dream of, but they had never faced someone who understood that every technological system had vulnerabilities that could be exploited. He worked quickly to modify a series of maintenance drones that were normally used for external ship repairs. Each drone was equipped with a payload specifically designed to exploit weaknesses in Corvani ship construction that he had discovered while studying their technical manuals. The beauty of his plan lay in its elegant simplicity. The modified drones looked exactly like standard repair units in broadcast all the proper identification codes as they launched from the captured command ship toward their targets. Throughout the fleet, Corvani crew saw what appeared to be routine maintenance drones approaching their vessels and following standard protocols. They allowed the units to dock and begin their supposed repair routine. Engineer So Young had helped him program the drones to target specific systems on each ship. The aliens had standardized their designs across the entire fleet, which made them efficient to build and maintain, but also meant that the same vulnerabilities existed on every vessel. Once Tamin had figured out how to exploit one ship, he could attack them all. The Arminia had contributed her knowledge of alien biology to help design devices that would disable the crew without killing them unnecessarily. Tamin preferred to win battles through superior tactics rather than mindless slaughter. The goal was to defeat the enemy, not to become a monster in the process. The first ship reactor went critical exactly 17 minutes after the drone had docked with it. The explosion lit up space like a miniature star, and debris scattered in all directions. The other ships in the fleet immediately went to high alert, thinking they were under attack by an unknown enemy force. They began scanning for threats while their own destruction continued. According to Taman's Schedule 1 by 1, the modified drones completed their missions and the Corvani fleet began tearing itself apart. Explosions bloomed across the darkness of space as ship after ship fell victim to the systematic sabotage. Some vessels lost power and drifted helplessly, while others had their weapon systems overload and destroy their own hulls. Commander Veltar, who was still alive but badly wounded on the bridge floor, watched in horror as his mighty fleet began destroying itself through the main viewing screen. The alien warrior had spent his entire life believing in the superiority of Corvani technology and military might. Now he was witnessing the impossible as a single human used that same technology against them. Impossible, he whispered in his alien language, his voice barely audible above the sound of alarms and emergency systems. You are just one primitive human from a backward planet. How can you do this to the greatest fleet in the galaxy? Tamin checked his simple wristwatch, a device that had survived battles across 3 star systems and still kept perfect time. That is the problem with you aliens, Tamin replied calmly as he monitored the destruction of the fleet through the ship sensors. You never learn the most important lesson about humans. We do not fight fair, because fair fights get good people killed. We fight to win, and we use every advantage we can find, no matter how small. The next wave of explosions began right on schedule. As more drones reached their targets and activated their payloads, Tamin had timed everything perfectly so that the fleet would not have time to adapt or respond to the threat. Each explosion was calculated to cause maximum damage while preserving enough ships for the final phase of his plan. Admiral Torvak's voice came through the communication system, demanding to know what was happening to his fleet. The Supreme Commander was aboard the massive battleship Eternal Conquest, which was positioned at the center of the formation. Taemin smiled as he realized that the most powerful ship in the fleet would be his final target. Through the communication channels, he could hear the panic spreading among the alien crews as they realized that their own maintenance systems had been turned against them. Some ships tried to destroy the drones before they could complete their missions, but the devices had been programmed to activate immediately if they detected any threat. Pilot Hyun-woo reported that 17 ships had been completely destroyed and another 23 were heavily damaged and no longer combat effective. The remaining 10 vessels were trying to regroup, but their formation had been shattered and their commanders were too confused to mount an effective response. The psychological impact of the attack was even more devastating than the physical damage. The Corvani had built their empire on the belief that their technology and military might made them invincible. Now they were watching their own systems being used to destroy them by a species they had dismissed as primitive and weak. Dr. Min Seo voice came through the intercom announcing that she had successfully treated all the injured human prisoners and that they were ready for the next phase of the mission. Engineer So Young reported that she had gained complete control of the ship manufacturing systems and could produce whatever equipment they needed as the fleet continued to tear itself apart. Around them, Taemin began preparing for the final confrontation. The remaining Corvani ships were no longer an organized military force, but a collection of frightened survivors who had watched their supposedly invincible fleet reduced to burning wreckage by a single human and a handful of prisoners. The aliens had learned too late that humans were dangerous, not because of their technology or their physical strength, but because of their absolute refusal to give up when something they cared about was threatened. They would use any weapon, adapt to any situation, and exploit any weakness to protect what they loved. Admiral Torvak was about to discover that all his military experience and advanced technology meant nothing against an enemy who refused to fight by the established rules of warfare. The surviving Corvani ships scattered across space like frightened animals, trying desperately to regroup and understand what had happened to their mighty fleet. Admiral Torvak was screaming orders through the communication channels, demanding status reports and threatening severe punishment for anyone who failed to respond. But Taemin had spent years learning how predators thought, and now he was the hunter stalking prey that had nowhere to hide. He had tracked enemies through the Amazon jungle, where every shadow could conceal death, and across Arctic wastelands where one mistake meant freezing to death in minutes. Those experiences had taught him patience and how to think like his prey. Now an entire alien fleet had become his hunting ground, and he intended to use every advantage he had learned using the captured command ship advanced stealth systems. Taemin began moving through the debris field left by the destroyed vessels. The Corvani sensors were designed to detect large threats and energy signatures, but they had difficulty tracking a single ship that was running on minimal power and using the wreckage as cover. Each attack was planned to be both surgical and psychological rather than simply destroying the remaining ships. Taemin would disable their weapons systems, rescue any human prisoners who might be aboard, then leave the vessel drifting helplessly while he moved on to the next target. This approach was designed to break the enemy morale as much as their military capability. The first target was a heavy cruiser called the Iron Fang that had been damaged in the initial wave of explosions but was still trying to coordinate the fleet defense. Taemin approached from the ship blind spot, using a piece of debris as cover until he was close enough to attach a modified drone to their hull. The drone burned through the ship's outer armor and released a computer virus that engineer So Young had created using her knowledge of Corvani systems. Within minutes, the Iron Fang lost control of all its major systems, including weapons, navigation, and life support. The crew was forced to focus on basic survival rather than fighting. Pilot Hyun-woo had discovered that human reflexes were actually faster than Corvani responses when adrenaline kicked in. The aliens were stronger and had more advanced technology, but they had evolved on a world where they were the dominant predators. Humans had evolved on Earth where everything was trying to kill them, and that made them better at surviving unexpected threats. Dr. Minesio found ways to treat wounded humans, using alien medical technology that was far more advanced than anything available on Earth. She set up a medical bay on the captured ship and began caring for prisoners rescued from the damaged vessels. Her work was saving lives and giving the freed humans the strength to join the fight. Each rescued human became a force multiplier that the aliens could not calculate or counter. Engineer So Young taught them how to sabotage Corvani systems from the inside. Pilot Dian Wu showed them how to operate alien vehicles and weapons. Dr. Minesio kept them healthy and fighting fit, while Taemin coordinated their attacks with military precision. The Corvani crews began reporting ghost stories throughout the fleet. They described a human warrior who appeared without warning, struck with impossible precision, then vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Their reports sounded like superstition, but the destroyed ships and rescued prisoners proved that something unprecedented was happening. Captain Dex Nor of the battle cruiser Void Hunter tried to set a trap by pretending his ship was disabled and waiting for the human to approach, but Taemin had been setting and avoiding traps since his first day of SEAL training. He attacked from an unexpected direction, using a captured fighter craft to disable the Void Hunter engines before boarding the ship. The hand-to-hand combat aboard the alien vessels showcased the difference between warriors who fought for conquest and soldiers who fought for survival. The Corvani were skilled fighters, but they had always relied on superior numbers and technology. Taemin and the freed humans fought with the desperation of people who had nothing left to lose. As the fleet numbers continued to dwindle, the remaining Corvani commanders faced a choice that went against everything in their warrior culture. They could continue fighting and face total annihilation, or they could retreat and admit that they had been defeated by a species they had dismissed as primitive. The psychological impact was devastating. Admiral Torvak tried to rally his remaining ships by reminding them of their glorious victories and the honor of dying in battle, but his warriors were no longer listening to speeches about glory. They were terrified of shadows and jumping at every sensor reading that might indicate the approach of the human ghost ship. The communication channels filled with panicked reports of ships losing power, mysterious explosions, and crew members disappearing without explanation. Some captains reported that their own crew were turning against them as rescued human prisoners convinced alien soldiers that the war was already lost. Taemin monitored all these communications while planning his next moves. The psychological warfare was working even better than he had hoped. The aliens were defeating themselves through fear and confusion, while he conserved his resources for the final confrontation with Admiral Torvak. Battleship Dr. Minesio had now treated over 60 rescued human prisoners, and many of them were eager to join the fight against their former captors. Engineer So Young had trained a dozen humans to operate alien technology, and they were becoming increasingly effective at sabotage and electronic warfare. Pilot Hyun-woo had assembled a small fleet of captured fighter craft. The Corvani Empire had started the day with 50 warships and thousands of elite soldiers. Now, fewer than 8 vessels remained operational, and their crews were on the verge of mutiny. The human they had dismissed as a primitive savage had become their worst nightmare, and the final battle was approaching fast. As Taemin prepared for the assault on the Eternal Conquest, he reflected on how the situation had changed. The aliens had thought they were dealing with a simple rescue mission, but instead they had encountered something they could not understand or defeat: a human who refused to accept that any fight was hopeless. Admiral Torvak was about to learn that the greatest weapon humans possessed was not technology or strength, but the absolute determination to protect what they loved, no matter what the cost. The final battle took place in a graveyard of twisted metal and burning debris that had once been the most powerful fleet in the known galaxy. Admiral Torvak stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Conquest, watching his tactical displays show the impossible truth that a single human had destroyed 42 warships and scattered the survivors like leaves in a storm. The battleship was 3 miles long and carried enough firepower to level entire continents its shields could stop. The combined attack of a dozen enemy fleets and its crew of 5,000 represented the elite of Corvani military might, but none of that mattered now, because Taemin was not fighting the kind of battle that Admiral Torvak understood. The human approach was a masterpiece of improvised warfare that combined everything he had learned during 15 years of impossible missions. He used the wreckage of destroyed ships as cover, coordinating with freed human prisoners across multiple vessels, while exploiting every weakness he had discovered in Corvani technology. And psychology engineer So Young had rigged the debris field with devices that could move pieces of wreckage. According to human planning, the floating metal became a weapon. As chunks of destroyed ships suddenly changed course and slammed into the eternal conquest at critical points, the aliens found themselves fighting the ghosts of their own fleet. The Armen had treated over 80 rescued humans, and many of them were now operating captured alien fighters in coordinated attacks against the battleship. The medical officer had also developed ways to use Corvani healing technology to enhance human performance, allowing the rescued prisoners to fight with strength and endurance that matched their alien captors. Pilot Hen Wu led a squadron of captured fighters in precision strikes against the battleship weapon systems, while Taemin used the command ship to attack from unexpected angles the aliens had designed their defenses to repel external threats, but they had never considered that their enemies might coordinate attacks from inside their own formation. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical damage. Admiral Torvak watched his sensors show impossible readings as human fighters appeared and disappeared like ghosts, using stealth technology that the aliens thought only they possessed. The freed prisoners had learned to operate Corvani systems better than many of the original crew. Taemin final assault on the bridge was a combination of everything that made humans dangerous in combat. He moved through the ship corridors like water flowing around obstacles, using ventilation shafts, maintenance tunnels, and service corridors that the proud aliens never bothered to defend properly. The bridge crew had prepared for a traditional boarding action with energy weapons and close combat in open spaces. Instead, they faced an enemy who used their own equipment against them, turning computer consoles into weapons, environmental controls into traps, and the artificial gravity system into an ally that helped him move in ways that seemed to defy physics. When Admiral Torvak finally faced Taemin in single combat, the alien commander realized he was looking at something completely new in the galaxy. This was not just a soldier or even a warrior. This was what happened when an entire species spent millions of years learning to survive on a planet that was actively trying to kill everything that lived on it. Every human carried the genetic memory of surviving ice ages, plagues, predators, and each other. They were all warriors, whether they admitted it or not, because only the ones who could fight and adapt and refuse to give up had lived long enough to have children. The Navy SEAL standing before him was just the most refined example of what every human could become. The final duel was brief and decisive. Admiral Torvak had 4 arms, advanced training, and weapons that could cut through steel, but Taemin had something the alien could never understand: the absolute certainty that giving up was not an option. When the admiral fell, the last organized resistance of the Corvani fleet died with him. The news of the fleet destruction spread across the galaxy faster than light-speed communication could carry it. The Corvani Empire, which had seemed unstoppable just days before, suddenly faced rebellions on every conquered world. Other alien species began studying human military tactics and sending diplomats to Earth requesting alliance treaties. The galaxy had learned that humanity might appear weak when judged individually, but they possessed something that no amount of advanced technology could replicate. They had the absolute refusal to surrender when protecting something they loved, and the creativity to turn any disadvantage into a weapon. Captain Taemin returned to Earth as a hero, but he knew that the real victory belonged to every human who had ever refused to give up when the odds seemed impossible. The colonists who had evacuated their children under fire, the prisoners who had joined the fight despite their fear, and the people back home who had built a civilization worth defending. The freed prisoners returned to their families with stories that would be told for generations. Engineer So Young went back to building things that would make life better. Dr. Min Seo continued healing people who needed help, and Pilot Hyanwu taught others how to fly among the stars. But the most important legacy was the message that humanity had sent to the galaxy. Earth was not a world of primitive creatures waiting to be conquered. It was the home of a species that had learned through millions of years of hardship that survival required courage, creativity, and the willingness to fight for what mattered most. The aliens had made one fatal mistake in their assessment of humanity. They had judged humans by their own standards of strength and technology, never realizing that Earth children spent their entire lives learning to overcome obstacles that would crush the spirit of most galactic species. Every human who had ever gotten back up after being knocked down, every person who had helped a stranger in need, every individual who had chosen to do what was right instead of what was easy had contributed to the victory. The galaxy would never underestimate Earth again. The legend of the Navy SEAL who destroyed an entire alien fleet became a symbol of human determination, but Taemin knew that any human in his position would have done the same thing, because that was what humans did when everything they cared about was threatened. They found a way to win no matter how impossible it seemed. Arms were watching him through the energy bars that glowed with a soft blue light. Commander Veltar stood outside the cage, studying this human prisoner with his large, yellow eyes that had no pupils. The Kavani warrior was 8 feet tall, and his skin looked like thick leather. His forearms each ended in hands that had 6 fingers with claws that could cut through steel. His voice was deep and sounded like rocks grinding together when he spoke to his soldiers. These Corvani had conquered 12 different star systems in the past 5 years, and they thought humans were just another weak species that would fall easily to their advanced weapons and superior strength. They had attacked Mars Colony 7 without warning, using ships that could destroy entire cities with one shot. Their ground troops had expected the human defenders to run away in fear like so many other species had done before, but Taemin had not run away. He had stayed behind when the evacuation ships left. To make sure all the colony children got to safety, he had held his position at the main gate for 4 hours, against impossible odds, using only his rifle and the explosives he carried. The aliens had been surprised when this small human soldier had destroyed 2 of their assault vehicles and killed 15 of their warriors before they finally captured him. What the Corvani did not know was that Taemin had spent 15 years training with Earth's most dangerous military units. He had completed missions in places where other soldiers could not survive. He had learned to fight in deserts where the temperature reached 140 degrees and in Arctic conditions, where exposed skin would freeze in seconds. He had been trained to survive underwater for impossible lengths of time and to climb mountains that most people thought were too dangerous to attempt. His mind was already working. Even though his body was trapped in the alien cage, he was watching the guard patterns and memorizing how many steps it took each alien to walk from one end of the corridor to the other. He counted the seconds between when the energy bars powered down for cleaning and when they came back up. He noticed that the ship had a rhythm to its sounds and vibrations that told him when the engines were working hardest and when they were running on minimum power. The other human prisoners in nearby cages were whispering to each other about how hopeless their situation was. There were 23 other humans captured from the colony, including Dr. Min Seo, who had been working in the medical center, and engineer So Young, who had been trying to repair the colony defense systems when the attack began. They all looked at Taemin with a mixture of hope and fear, because they had heard stories about what Navy SEALs could do. Young alien guard Zekros brought food to the prisoners twice each day, and Taemin watched him carefully. The guard was smaller than the other Corvani soldiers and seemed nervous around the human prisoners. His energy weapon took exactly 4 seconds to charge up from standby mode, and he always approached the cages from the left side because there was a slight blind spot in the corridor security sensors on that side. Taemin also noticed that the main power conduits for this section of the ship ran directly above the prisoner holding area. The aliens had built their